All right, it's another film study as we're going to look back at the Week 8 tough loss to the Steelers. Ken McKusick, how you doing?
Life's good, Josh. How about you?
I'm doing great. This loss was tough, but I'm really excited because it felt like the Ravens-Steelers rivalry was back after
Yeah,
last season seemed like off.
very much so, and it definitely was a game I think the Ravens certainly could have won. So it doesn't felt like they really got outplayed in the game, certainly in any sense, except for the turnover battle primarily. And it's just a shame that's the way the game went.
Yeah, of course. But it was a weird game. But before we get into this game, let's bring in our guest for today, which is Aaron from Penn Live. Aaron, how you doing?
I'm great. How you guys doing?
Great to have you back on the show, Aaron. Always a pleasure when you do here. Aaron, big insider with Penn Live. He's one of the people you can really count on to give good pregame information and good information otherwise. And Josh, I'm sorry, you got a reader to do now, don't you?
Well, yeah, we got to do the MyBookie ad because I don't know, everyone hopefully hopped on MyBookie last week. We're going to continue hyping up MyBookie this week because we like it. So between the NFL, college ball, the election, there's no shortage of games to watch. Lines, thousands of lines available for your favorite sports and events, and you can turn your game day into payday with MyBookie. And there's plenty of deals out there, especially if you want to hop on the underdog. There's lots of value in there where you could really make some money. I told you guys this weekend to stay away from the Ravens-Steelers line, and I did that until about 12:45, where I saw it was at 4 points, and I hopped on the Steelers side because I figured it would be a 3-point game.
Oh, man.
So I did make a little bit of money this weekend thanks to the Steelers.
Ill-gotten gains all the way. Congratulations, Josh.
Exactly. Well, the plan was for the Ravens to win by 3, and then I can cash out. And it was looking really good for a long time. So if you're head on over to MyBookie, use the code RAVENS to get your dollar-for-dollar matching claim deposit up to $1,000, which is a pretty big deal. It's dollar for dollar just for going over and using the code RAVENS at mybookie.ag.
You have to roll your money to get that, but it's still a fantastic deal. Very good bargain on gambling to get a 1-for-1 match on your dollars. That's up to $1,000. So if you want to bet big, you can. And if you want to bet really big, you probably have to do it more with your own money. But if you want to bet pretty big, you can certainly kick in on this bonus. We had one interesting thing happen from a spread perspective this weekend, Josh, that I thought was kind of cool. The Jets were 19.5-point dogs in the game. And there have only been 16 previous games where there was a spread of 19 or more since 1978. And the underdogs were 0-16 in those games, but they were 13-3 against the spread, which is unbelievable, frankly. It's an unbelievable combination of things. So anyway, I thought the Chiefs might be a pretty good bet, plus 19.5, but the Chiefs covered. The Jets were a big good bet. Yeah.
Yeah, when it's 19 points, you realize you don't see that big of a differential between teams a whole lot. And the only reason I shared about betting on the Steelers and winning a little bit of money because every other game I picked this weekend was a loser. So I had to use a positive example in there. But anyway, let's move on. Plenty of stuff to talk about. Plus, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, you're probably waiting to see who wins tonight. And we're not going to get into that because I don't think Anthony Santander will really win the Gold Glove tonight. So instead, let's just talk about the Ravens and this Steelers matchup, which I think the best way to start is that you got to go and attend it as a fan with these new COVID procedures.
Yeah, so that was fun, at least. It was very easy to get down there. I mean, you're used to a huge egress and access problem to the stadium. Just drive down there, you park on the Horseshoe Casino in a half-empty lot there. The Ravens are selling some parking. That wouldn't have been a good buy, I don't think. But anyway, got to go to the game. Unfortunately, wearing a mask and having glasses makes the game a very difficult process to watch. Aaron, I don't know where are you ever wear a mask in the press box too for the game?
Yep. We gotta wear masks all the time, but I go contacts because the glasses just fog up too much.
Smart guy. I got to do that if we go to another game. Is go back to my contacts for that. That's a really smart move. All right, bad loss coming out of the bye, Aaron. I think we agree this is a game that the Ravens should have been favored in, and they, in all honesty, should have won.
Yeah, and you guys mentioned at the top that it did feel like a Ravens Steelers rivalry, and the Ravens did. It kind of felt like a little bit of the 2019 Ravens when they got the running game going, but the turnovers, it was just such a big glaring issue there that cost them a game that really they outplayed the Steelers in most areas.
Yeah. A couple high leverage plays. Obviously, we've seen that before. We saw it against the Titans. We've seen it against San Diego. We've seen it other times. But this was a bad game where they really had it won. Otherwise, the losses during the game very significant, and then the loss after in terms of Humphrey. Let's talk first about Ronnie Stanley and the injury. Maybe you know something from the inside on the nature of that injury.
And nothing beyond what's been reported, which is that it's a fracture dislocation and some likely ligament damage. John Harbaugh said today that Stanley will have surgery soon, and that he's hopeful he can be back for OTAs in May. But that's such a long way away. It does seem like it's a serious injury, but nothing that should be career threatening. Hopefully we'll hear about a successful surgery soon.
Right. They never tell you about an unsuccessful surgery. They never use those words after it. Obviously the Stanley situation, very dire. Had a good recovery from Matt Skura from a very serious injury last year. Yeah. Stanley seems like the type of guy who would work very hard on a rehab, just like he works very hard on his offensive line craft.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Ravens medical staff they've gotten a lot of players back in pretty short order. So not a great situation, but certainly could be worse considering how painful it looked when Stanley was first on the ground.
Okay. Now, the other obviously crappy news this last couple of days is Marlon Humphrey on the COVID list. And so give us a little background on what happens with that in terms of his shutdown and maybe some of the COVID protocols for the team that go on after this.
Yeah, so they're what's called intensive protocols, which is basically just a amped up version of the protocols that every team across the league has been dealing with all year. All meetings this week will be virtual. Practice will still go on, but there'll be some differences in terms of who's wearing masks and who's wearing gloves and stuff like that. But John Harbaugh said today that it's kind of all systems go. They're still going to move forward. What could change that is the contact tracing, which at least as of this afternoon, Monday afternoon, they were still in that process. If it was deemed that Marlon Humphrey had multiple close contacts, we could see a few other players miss a few days of practice, even if they don't test positive for coronavirus because they need to quarantine as close contacts. So those are kind of the things to watch, and we won't really know for the next couple of days, whether or not Marlon Humphrey has passed the virus on to somebody else. So I think everyone's kind of holding their breath until probably Wednesday or Thursday when we get some test results back.
Yeah, no pun intended there. So anyway, the test was positive on Monday or after the game, or when was the test taken that was positive?
The test was taken Sunday morning, before the game. They just don't get the results back until late Sunday night, early Monday morning. And this has been the case the past 2 weeks. The NFL has done these tests before the game. So the positive test was before the game. That's why the Steelers are also in intensive protocol.
Did not know that
because they played against the Ravens. And Marlon Humphrey actually missed practice on Wednesday with an illness. The team sent him home because he had some symptoms. Came back and practiced Thursday, Friday. Played in the game Sunday. So that's just kind of the nature of this virus that people don't know the viral load and all that. So I'm not a doctor, but it's a situation where somebody can have the virus but test negative one day, positive the next day. So kind of a lot of variables there.
But he would have been tested after that missed practice day for other flu-like symptoms or cold symptoms.
Yes, he tested negative every day. That's why he was able to continue practicing. Maybe it was unrelated. It's unclear.
Are they, since he is without symptoms, are they continuing to do more tests as far as false positives and all that? Or is he now just done for 2 weeks, no matter what?
John Harbaugh said today that it's a 10-day window for Humphrey, which means he's symptomatic. The way the NFL does it is if you're asymptomatic, you can get back as quickly as 5 days after a positive test with multiple negative tests. But if you're symptomatic, it's 10 days. And because Humphrey experienced some symptoms that kept him out of practice last week, I believe he was deemed symptomatic, which means it's 10 days no matter what. So he'll miss the Colts game. John Harbaugh said that today, that there's no question that he'll be out for at least 1 week, and we'll have to see whether or not he can suit up against the Patriots in 2 weeks.
Okay, well, let's move on to the game itself. Obviously, it's a serious situation with Humphrey. We hope for the best for him.
Yeah.
The nature of fans is there's always a selfishness about, we want this player back on the field for us, and what's really important is that Marlon not suffer any after effects of COVID here, and that the rest of the team has avoided infection, and the Steelers for that matter as well. But let's talk about the game a little bit. I've mentioned before, the defense I thought played well enough to win this game. They certainly were handed some really bad starting field positions. They gave away some points that weren't on the defense directly. But I thought otherwise the defense played pretty well in most respects in this game. They certainly held the Steelers to a low enough average yards per play and third down success that they should have won the game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And obviously you can point to some of the adjustments that the Steelers made down the stretch, and they were able to get a rhythm down the stretch. But holding the Steelers to essentially 2 touchdowns if you're the defense, because the Steelers had 1 pick six and 1 interception near the red zone. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I would agree. And the adjustments we certainly need to talk about. We may as well get right to it, because I think it's really the story of this game defensively for the Ravens. Is the Steelers really probed for most of that first half, trying to find a running rhythm, including some 6-man offensive line and various other things they tried to get going in the run game. They never could. And Steelers obviously a pretty physical offensive line, and one that certainly should have a chance to run the ball effectively, even against the Ravens. Return of Brandon Williams certainly helped the Ravens in part. They went with 4 defensive linemen, but were quite effective against the run.
Yeah, obviously Brandon Williams, the numbers show how important he is with the run game. And I thought, there are several guys who, Jalen Ferguson held the edge well. So several guys who played well against the run early on. And that's why the Ravens entered halftime with a 10-point lead, because the Steelers just couldn't get anything going.
Yeah, and in the first half, Roethlisberger missed some passes, but they didn't really deploy their strategy of 4 wide receiver sets in any kind of great numbers until the second half. And I'm looking at my own personal score sheet of this. Bonds was only in for 1 play. It happened to be the pass fumble. So that was a 4 wide receiver set on that first drive the Steelers had. But otherwise, he didn't play in the entire first half. So it was really in the second half that they went to a strategy of putting forward wide receivers on the field. The only real response for that is to use a 4 cornerback dime, where the Ravens are forced then to put their 4th best cornerback on the field. And they correctly estimated that Terrell Bonds would be inexperienced. And not only that the use of the additional wide receivers would allow for some shallow crosses and other things that would target Patrick Queen in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at least in the official game, both Bonds had 17 total snaps. So that's a good chunk of snaps he played in the second half, if he only played 1 in the first half. But yeah, I mean, typically if you're spreading 4 wide and you're forcing a team to go to 4 cornerbacks, if the Ravens were healthy, the Ravens are probably the best equipped NFL team to handle that, because they've got a bunch of really good cornerbacks. But if you count Tavon Young and Anthony Averett and even Amon Marshall, Terrell Bonds isn't their 4th best quarterback. He's their 7th best cornerback. Mm-hmm. And obviously you can exploit, every team tries to create matchups to exploit linebackers and coverage and things like that. And it just worked for the Steelers. And the thing about the Steelers is they have the talent, the wide receiver talent to do that. I think they entered the game with 4 different receivers who had over 185 receiving yards. They've got the talent to spread you out and beat you.
Yeah, they certainly have. They have very spread targets on the Steelers, more than just about any team in the NFL. Roethlisberger, the quickest to deliver. He has a 2.29 average time to throw for the entire year, 2.29 seconds. That's the quickest in the entire NFL. By the way, that number is often misused for various reasons. We've talked about occasionally on this show, but I just want to make sure people know that's not the amount of time the offensive line is giving him. That's how quickly he's getting rid of the ball, and it's mostly a function of how that Steelers offense is run, with a lot of shallow crosses, a lot of pick routes and rubs that come off bunch formation in particular. We go look back to the Chiefs game. That was an enormous problem for the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously the offenses are different. They're designed a little different, the Chiefs and the Steelers, but similarly that you've got strong-armed quarterbacks, you've got offenses that are running these rub type plays and getting the ball out quick. And it's something that Wink Martindale is going to have to address. teams are able to spread them out at this point, and it kind of seems like that maybe the defense is a little bit on its heels when offenses come out with 4 receivers, and it's something they're going to have to figure out. They've got the talent to combat it. They just haven't really done it in their 2 losses.
Right. You mentioned the 2 long drives earlier as being, I'm sorry, you mentioned the 2 short drives of the 21-yard drive. And actually, that had a really bad play by Patrick Queen on that we're going to have to talk about at some point. But he completely missed his assignment, picked up a guy in man coverage when the coverage was zone. Fort is obviously pointing to him to take over this receiver, and Queen isn't there.
Yeah.
So it was an unfortunate play. We've seen too much of that, frankly, from Patrick Queen at this point in the year. And he played all 53 snaps in this game, or all 50, I should say, that I count defensively because I take the penalties out. But anyway, he was on the field the entire time. Part of that was some of the defensive flexibility that was lost with Matthew Judon, because they really will play a 0 inside linebacker dime fairly frequently when they have Judon active, but they need his coverage skill and Bowser on the field at the same time to do it.
Yeah, and that's I imagine that is why Patrick Queen ended up. I don't think he played more than maybe one game. He played more than 80% of the snaps, and then played obviously 100% this week. I don't know if Yannick Ngakoue would be able to fill that role had he had more experience. Probably not. Judon is a pretty unique player in that way, so that's certainly it. And 2 things about that play on the touchdown drive. With Patrick Queen kind of missing that assignment there. John Harbaugh has said in the past that the toughest thing for a rookie linebacker to learn is zone coverage. So I think that's really the thing they're trying to hammer in on with Queen. And Ken, if you were at the game, maybe you saw it, but after that play, Marcus Peters ripped his helmet off and was saying something to Patrick Queen, which Peters is a guy who doesn't hold back his emotions. At first, I wasn't sure, maybe if he was upset at the offense for turning the ball over, but he was upset after that one. So it was pretty clearly just a missed assignment.
Yeah, it was a bad one. Peters, it's interesting because he wears his body language completely on his sleeve, just like you're talking about. And when he had the blown coverage, when he tried to jump a shorter route, I think it was to Tyreek Hill when McCole Hardman had the touchdown against Kansas City, you could see his shoulders slump and he walked off the field. I mean, that body language straight up and down from Peters is not normal. He should be excited or upset or something. And if it had been somebody else's fault, he'd have been really upset. But that one is clearly his problem.
Yeah, so, you can tell with him.
Yeah. The level of general frustration with Patrick Queen on the defense, I mean, I know they all know he's going to be great, and they're all excited probably about the fact that he will be great, but they're frustrated as hell with him right now. And it's across the board. You see player after player making demonstrative gestures on the field to Queen. I think I counted 5 in one game. I'm forgetting which one it was. It wasn't Kansas City. I think it might have been the Washington game, or it might have been the Cincinnati game. One of those 2, where he had a number of coverage mistakes and was otherwise playing well, but he's frustrating as hell as a coverage player. Yeah,
and I think who knows, had it been more of a regular offseason, maybe that would have solved some of the issues. And the thing is that he's made so many plays that it kind of masks it. I mean, the forced fumbles, the touchdown return, the sacks. And I think that's why from a fan perspective and even from a reporter perspective, he's been fun to watch. He's exciting. He won Defensive Player of the Week. But yeah, on a snap-to-snap level, it's pretty clear that there's been some miscues. And you got to hope that he didn't have a preseason, didn't have a training camp. You got to hope that he's going to improve from week 1 to week 6, week 6 to week 10, week 10 to week 17, maybe more than any other player on the team.
Well, I think, part of the reason he was drafted as high as he was, despite being a very unproven college talent, was they loved the trajectory of his improvement. Yeah. And I still think a lot of what he did in college was completely based on his own athleticism and the greatness of the players around him. So a linebacker in the 70s who kind of reminds me of is Isaiah Robertson, as being a guy who could just run all over the field behind a great defensive line and make plays for LA at that time. But he's got a little bit of that in him. If he's in on first and second down, there's a higher probability they're going to run. There's a lower cost in terms of leverage on pass plays. I think that's the place for him right now. I think they're going to have to go back to a situation where Queen is off the field on third down. And they've been doing that most of the time so far. Not all the time, because he's been playing some in dime. but I think they could basically take him off the field now on third down. I think it would be the right thing for the Ravens. They've got two coverage weaknesses they really need to address, but that's the first, and that's what I'd do.
Yeah, I certainly think that's an option. You have to have the personnel to do it, whether it's using Judon or, certainly they don't mind sliding up safeties. Chuck Clark plays in the box a lot. It's fine to say you need Patrick Queen off the field. I guess my question would be, you just got to make. Yeah, Ford would be the one you would have in there.
Yeah, he played as the lone inside linebacker in dime a fair amount last year, so it really makes more sense that he could be that guy. The Mike role, which Ford has not played this year specifically, is not really as specific a responsibility on third down. You're more of a zone pass defender when you're on the field, since there's so little in terms of run responsibility. So I don't think there's the real problem with that. I think he could play fine with Clark as the dime back in that spot. And I mean, they could have gone to that in this game. There wasn't a reason why they couldn't have gone to that in this game. It's just Ford hasn't done it yet this year.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good point. I'm curious whether the team wants Queen to take hold of that role and to improve there, and maybe down the stretch of the season, if he's still not there yet, maybe they do turn to Ford. That'd be an interesting thing to monitor.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put you on the spot here a little bit because I know you're a reporter and you don't like to take maybe a definitive stand on this kind of thing sometimes. But they've got the four most important games of before the playoffs coming up. These next four, these are all against quarterbacks, with maybe the exception of Cam Newton, who really know how to pick apart a zone defense with short passes. And boy, that's all you need to do is you need to figure out, find Patrick Queen, find the fourth cornerback, do whatever you got to do. I mean, I'm afraid the blueprint is out right now on the Ravens, and there's going to be a lot of teams trying to use 4 wide receiver sets against them. That's going to be part of the installation that other teams are ready to go with.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And the 4 weeks, Anthony Averett's injury was the fractured shoulder was supposed to be a 5 to 6 week injury, so it's likely that he's going to miss all those games that you talked about through that Steelers Thanksgiving rematch. So yeah, it's going to be whoever it is, Terrell Bonds, whoever else is the fourth corner. I think that is the way you attack this Ravens defense at this point, is to spread them out the way that the Steelers did. But the Ravens have done a pretty good job. I've covered the team since 2018, and they've done a really good job each of those 3 years making adjustments.
Oh yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if Wink fires something up where he's obviously the creative blitzes and all that stuff. Can they find something that's an answer there, or is it really just they right now don't have the horses to match up with the team and to contend with quarterbacks like these ones who get the ball out quick?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that Wink Martindale, of all the Ravens defensive coordinators in their history, I don't necessarily think he's been the best. I think Rex Ryan is still ahead of him. I think you can make the case Marvin Lewis is still ahead of him. But if you look back at who was the best adjuster, both in game and in game planning from game to game, he's it. He is the ultimate snap count manager. He's what they did last year to revamp that flush the toilet on the inside linebacker core they had. Basically after 4 games, was remarkable.
Yeah, super impressive. I mean, last year it was Peanut Owasu who was supposed to be the guy, and I think they decided pretty quickly, nope, he can't do it. And a lot of teams would be screwed in that situation. They figured it out. And the way they remade the defense in 2018, it was meant to streamline communication, make sure that players could adjust, make sure it's easy for players to learn. Which is part of the reason I think they were able to last year incorporate so many new people. So yeah, that's really the challenge. I think Wink's done a great job. The defense has done a great job, and we're talking about a blueprint to beat them, even though the Steelers didn't figure it out until the second half. Right. So I think there's a lot of positives, and I don't want to give Wink the benefit of the doubt. Certainly he needs to adjust, but I think Ravens fans can have some confidence that if there's a way to find a fix, he's going to be getting after it.
Right. I agree. I think schematically he's the guy I want at the helm making those choices, certainly. But my second question is, do they really need to do something from a personnel standpoint anyway? And it would be before tomorrow at 4 p.m. or actually today at 4 p.m. when you're listening to this. Do they need to try and pick up a slot corner? Brian Poole has been a name mentioned. Obviously, Desmond King was mentioned before he got dealt yesterday on Monday. seem like a reasonable possibility still to you?
Yeah, anything's possible. Do they have the resources? Can they have the right situation where they pull the trigger? Um, by the time people are listening to this, maybe maybe Eric DeCosta's already made a deal, but it is tough. It's very difficult, and the trades that Eric DeCosta have made not just in season, but even before the season, since he's taken over, they've mostly been big name guys. You trade for Calais Campbell, you trade for Marcus Peters, um, obviously you trade for Yannick Ngakoue. Uh, can he make that minor move just before the deadline? He hasn't done that yet. It's not to say that that's a problem, but it's not easy to do. And certainly, I think they could upgrade over Terrell Bonds. Can they do it in a manner that still makes sense for the team? That's the question. And I think it's going to be really hard to thread that needle.
Right. I agree, but Poole and Desmond King are both first contract players, very cheap in terms of cap cost. Final year of the deal, they're essentially rentals. If you're the New York Jets, you got a lot of cap space left next year, and you might not want to trade Poole. You might want to sign him because he's one of many who you could end up signing with your huge hoard of cash next year. If you decide you're going to be signing a lot of players, the fact that Poole is traded isn't going to hose your compensatory pick situation. So you weren't going to get any comp picks because you have to sign a bunch of guys with your huge hoard of cash anyway.
Yeah, and Poole's an interesting guy, and if you're talking him specifically, obviously Joe Douglas, the Jets general manager, came up, in the Ravens system, and certainly has some relationship with Eric DeCosta. And the other folks here in Baltimore. So that's a possibility, no doubt. And when you're talking about making these kind of moves, that matters. The familiarity matters. I think you can look at the Jets roster and realize the familiarity matters because of how many Ravens players they have. It makes sense. Can they get something done? I'm skeptical, but we'll see.
So one of the problems is King got traded at the perfect price today for a 6th-round pick. Just an incredible bargain. It's the kind of move you'd expect DeCosta to make. And I wonder, why didn't he make that pick? The Ravens didn't technically have a 6th-round selection, but that doesn't mean you can't trade, 5 for 5 or 4 for 4 exchange to come up with a similar kind of value that would have been there. It's to me, it's really a shame that they could not figure out how to get it done at that total draft capital cost.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And who knows what the discussions were? The team is always very tight-lipped about trade discussions. Maybe something will come out at some point. But yeah, it's hard to say. But I imagine DeCosta made an effort with King, and who knows exactly what that effort was. But you're right. I think people often look into, they don't have a 7th-round pick, they don't have a 4th-round pick. These teams know, they project where every team is going to draft,
sure.
and they have their draft charts where they have values for every pick. They can find a way to make the value even out.
Yeah, you put it off a year, including a discounted value of a pick. You got so many tools at your disposal. Right. You project the compensatory picks. You might get an option to trade one there. So just a whole bunch of possibilities. Yeah. All right. We're frustrated, obviously, about that pass defense, but one of the reasons I want the Ravens to pick up another slot corner is just because they can't field a dime defense right now. And we talked about not being able to field a 4th corner dime without going down to Terrell Bonds, which is bad. But they also have a problem. They don't have a 3rd safety who's playing right now on this team. So they have the big 2, and they're great. They've been fantastic, Elliott and Clark this year. But the 3rd safety, in 2018, Levine had a great year, but they're obviously, for injury purposes or whatever, he hasn't played since week 2.
Yeah, he hasn't played since week 2. I think that ab injury is something that is significant and bothering him. At this stage of his career, I don't know if he's a guy they'd rely on to play those 20 snaps. It was very surprising to me to see the team release Marcus Gilchrist, who was never technically on the roster. He was on a practice squad elevation. It's surprising to me to see them release Gilchrist without some corresponding move there to find that 3rd safety, because I just think that 3rd safety is so important. And that's why when you go back to this is bouncing around a little bit, but you go all the way back to Earl Thomas, release it. They released Earl Thomas. The ripple effects of moves like that aren't always that you don't have a guy to replace him. sometimes it's who replaces the guy who replaces him. Because I think Elliott would have been amazing in that third corner role, playing 25 snaps a game. Had things worked out differently. So yeah, no, it's surprising that they didn't replace Gilchrist, and that's something they got to figure out. Maybe they think Levine can do it at some point, but right now they don't have somebody.
Yeah, the evidence I look for on Levine is twofold. Number one is he had the greatest season ever by a Ravens dime in 2018. And I ask you to take me at my word at that. I've told the fans of the show this so many times they already know it by heart.
Yeah.
Clark then surpassed him in 2019, which is understandable. And it took a lot of Levine's playing time. He was only playing pretty much in the quarter last year. But I looked to this year, and when he was healthy in week 2, he started that game at big nickel. So he's playing slot corner, against the Texans to try and help, be the response to 12 personnel being on the field, or to some 11 personnel being on the field. It's just, when I see that, I say they're still okay having him on defense. They wouldn't put him out there in the slot and risk that if they wouldn't also be willing to have his play a more traditional dime back role where he's been able to read quarterbacks, and it's much more like playing like a linebacker with good short area instincts. So I think if he were healthy, and oblique injury, is that what you guess it is when they say abdomen?
That is my hunch. We're not able to get in the locker room this year, so haven't had a conversation with Levine specifically. But yeah, that wouldn't surprise me if it was obliques.
Yeah, so those kind of things with baseball players, I know they last forever.
Yeah.
So it's a crap situation, obviously. But anyway, they could go elsewhere for a third safety because there are other people on the street. Maybe Brandon Carr would be the guy who could come in and play that role, but they have not made a move to get a third safety. Do you know anything from your status in-house and whatnot about either Stone or Nigel Warrior from the practice squad and potential elevation of one of those guys?
No, nothing especially interesting. That the team has protected both of those players. Not that means a ton. A couple times, I think they really like Stone. I think that maybe they aren't entirely sure whether or not athletically he's there right now. And Nigel Warrior was a guy in training camp who would make tremendous play on the ball at one point, and then he would just get a tongue lashing from Chris Hewitt, the pass defense coordinator, the next play because he just totally butchered an assignment. So I think with Stone it's a little more physical, and maybe with Warrior it's a little more mental at this point. I don't know if either is ready to contribute regularly leading into a playoff push.
Fantastic insight there. That's something I really wanted to know, is what's kind of wrong with those guys to the fact that they're willing to go into a game with two safeties. They essentially played Chris Board in this game as a safety a fair amount. We're going to get to that a little bit in the packages. In fact, let's just jump into that right now. I like to go through these, talk about what they played on each one, and then wherever you like, just jump in and I'll let you have your shot.
Cool.
So they played 2 jumbo packages, 3 defensive backs, 4 defensive linemen. They were the first and third down, interestingly, on the last drive of the game. They were effective on those, including the stop that gave them one more chance. All right, continuing on, they had a very limited use of the base defense in this game, 9 snaps. It's always limited, but when the Steelers put 6 offensive linemen on the field, or so they put on 2 tight ends, they used a fair amount of that. Most of that was done in the first half. So they played 3 snaps of 6 offensive line, and they also played some, make sure I have this right, they also played some 12 personnel where the Ravens had it on. But the base defense, very effective, 9 plays, 19 yards, 2.1 yards per play. So very effective in their base look. And
certainly I think that's why the Steelers didn't run away from it so quickly in the second half. Ben Roethlisberger said after the game he was playing a little more backyard football in the second half. I think the Steelers were wise to get away from that, because I think that's where the Ravens had the guys to really stuff them.
All right. The jumbo nickel we talk about on this show, 1 inside linebacker, 3 down linemen, fairly unusually used. The Ravens just mix it in occasionally. Only 1 snap in this game for 1 play, 1 yard on that, with Queen as the only inside linebacker, of course, since he played every snap. Rush nickel. Now, this is an interesting one. They put this on the field on 3rd down. Now, what's happening here is they have the standard 3 outside linebackers on the play, which they normally have when they're in the dime. 1 defensive lineman only, but they had 2 inside linebackers instead, with Board as the second inside linebacker. effectively in that role, Board is switching to play the role of a dime safety or a dime back. And so it looks like a rush nickel in terms of the personnel that's on the field with only 5 defensive backs, but it's really more like a heavy dime thing with Board in there. Very effective on those plays, by the way. Board really was not the problem in this game. He played decently as the third safety. 4 plays, -2 yards. All 4 of those plays were drive-ending third down snaps.
That's impressive. That's good stats to know, and obviously Board's speed has been something the team's liked, and interesting that they were able to use that as effectively as they did.
Yeah, a pass defense in the game last week, which was, 2 weeks ago, and then a forced fumble in this game got half the credit for the sack of Roethlisberger, even though the Ravens could not get it recovered. He wasn't perfect. He played 2 other snaps in a standard nickel, and this is one of the weird thing about trying to define packages is you get in these situations where the personnel looks like a standard nickel, which is 2, 2, 2, and 5, meaning 2 defensive linemen, 2 outside linebackers, 2 inside linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. But it's not really a standard nickel because Board is one of them, and he's really trying to act like a dime back on the play. And it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. Obviously, I put it in the standard nickels in this game. Not obviously, but I did. And he allowed a 13-yard screen pass to Connor that I don't think is correctly assigned by some other rating services. And then he also was closest in zone when Roethlisberger had the 3rd and 4 completion for 7 yards to Smith-Schuster. So they were in a 2nd and 17 situation. He gave up consecutive plays effectively of 13 and 7 yards there.
Yeah. So that's a frustrating sequence there, but yeah, good to know.
What are you going to do, right? Standard nickel overall, they got back to fairly decent run defense in it with Williams and Wolf back. And it's a big difference for having Williams and Wolf and having Washington and who else was it? Ellis. No. 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they talk up Justin Ellis, and he's been active. In several games when I thought maybe he was borderline, they talk him up. They seem to like him. He's obviously a veteran guy who's been around, but he's not Brandon Williams. That's pretty clear.
I think every time that people start to badmouth Brandon Williams a little bit, he misses a game, and people realize just how much our defense needs him.
Right, and you pay a defensive tackle who's not really a pass rusher. I understand why that's going to draw so much skepticism, so much criticism, but stopping the run is still very important, and he's one of the best really in the NFL, and I think the team values what he brings in that regard.
Right. Well, anyway, they played the standard nickel 18 times total in the game. They allowed 4.4 yards per carry on those play. 2 weeks ago, that was 14.6 yards per carry. That was 146 on 10 carries versus the standard nickel. We've talked about this occasionally on the show, but the hallmark of the Ravens defense, the absolute hallmark for 25 years, has been the ability to have the personnel to stop the opponent from running with 11 personnel against a 6-man box. And that's basically that's use of standard nickel. They've always had personnel that have been great on the outside, an outside linebacker, great on the inside in terms of big bodies who could stuff it, and great linebackers who could chase and tackle. And they are remarkable in their consistency and their ability to do that. And it's nice to see them get back to it, even though 4.4 yards per carry isn't really a Ravens type result with it 35 yards on 8 carries, but it's 10 yards better per carry than they were without Brandon Williams.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize how poorly that happened against the Eagles. And with those sample sizes, one big run can skew it, but good to see them play a little bit better, and Brandon Williams is a guy who makes that big of a difference.
Yeah, really exciting to having him back was definitely a big deal. Let's go to the next package, the race car nickel. Now, you've heard me talk about the race car dime a fair amount, and the Ravens have played approximately or almost now 150 snaps of 4 outside linebacker formations. And this would be the one where Judon would have been used if he'd stayed around in this game more, I think. But they got to play it once. They used Judon as a standing inside linebacker on the play. They still also had Queen in the game on that play. But they used 4 outside linebackers, 1 inside linebacker, and 1 defensive lineman, which meant they only had a nickel secondary and not a dime secondary, which is where the race car is usually used. I'm going to take you back here for a second. The only time they have previously done this with 5 defensive backs on the field were the very first 3 times that Martindale used the race car in team history, which was versus Buffalo in that opener in 2018. They've always otherwise used it with the dime defense. And a very significant portion of total snaps here. And I mean, you haven't been on the show so far this year, but last year, 13.2% of the snaps were in this 4 outside linebacker package with the dime. And it's more than they played the base defense.
That's interesting. And I mean, they've got the guys to do it, right? I mean, Sunday, when you're looking at who's on the active roster, you've got Bowser, you've got Ngakoue, you've got McPhee, you've got Ferguson, and Judon, had he not been ejected. They've got the players to do it. So it seems like they've sort of built their defense to be able to lean on that package.
Yeah, they really have. And in particular, next year is going to be interesting because Judon and Bowser are both free agents, and they're what drive the thing because they're both linebackers who can drop to cover, and they drive a lot of the scheme that Wink can throw into this defense, which is really nice and wrinkly. But I think they really have to try and sign one of them. I think it's more likely probably they're going to try and keep Bowser and Ngakoue next year. But we'll see. Bowser may be too expensive as well. He may be a guy that gets an opportunity elsewhere. I'm kind of hoping, even though I wouldn't really wish this on Bowser, that nobody really has money to spend and the Ravens get a shot at getting him back at not too expensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's got to be a market thing. The right player, right price. Ozzie Newsome, Eric DeCosta mantra. They'll stick to that. And I imagine Bowser, for the reasons you mentioned, is a valuable player and a hardworking guy who's drafted with the team. But I don't think they view him as a top tier outside linebacker who deserves to be taking up a big chunk of cap space. So it'll be interesting to see if there is a market, or if the team maybe tries to strike a deal with him before it gets to the market, if they can do it at a cheap enough price.
Both of those have been suggested as possibilities. So possibly number one is that he plays on a really cheap contract next year because nobody has money. So maybe he comes in and plays for $2.5, $3 million, something like an RFA tender, effectively, that kind of money. But it's only a 1-year deal. Or possibly number two is they say, well, we really like you. We'll sign you for 3 years for $18 million or some amount that's like that, a kind of a moderate kind of amount. And it would be a fairly significant assignment of cap, but I just think he's so important to their scheme that they'd probably go with that.
And the Ravens have done that certainly since DeCosta's taken over with Tavon Young, Nick Boyle,
Patrick
Ricard, Chuck Clark. Even I think those are all deals that are kind of in that range where you're not making a guy anywhere near the highest pay to his position, but you're given enough money, and all those guys are very specific to the Ravens scheme. So certainly that's a possibility. A lot of that depends on how much Bowser and Bowser's agents, what they view his market as, before free agency as well.
That's a really good point. That's a lot of it will depend on that. All right, let's move on to the dime package the Ravens used. This 4 cornerback dime. We talked about a little bit about this. One of the really weird things in this game was the atypical down and distance usage. Now tell me if this sounds like when you use the dime defense. Twice, the Steelers spread the field with 4 wide receivers, and the Ravens on 3rd and 1 put the dime in. Both times, the Steelers converted by pass against the dime on 3rd and 1. Didn't try and run it. Ran with an empty backfield. In fact, on both plays, and it goes beyond normal to insulting the fact that the Steelers are able to dictate the Ravens play the dime, then also beat it on 3rd and 1 plays like that.
Yeah. I mean that's. I don't know, I wouldn't say a slap in the face, but that's something that I think probably irritates the Ravens defense more than pretty much anything else that transpired on Sunday.
Whereas the other interesting thing is that they didn't use it at the end of the half. They didn't use the dime. It was used at the 2 long drives, and every single other usage was on 1st or 2nd down. Very unusual because the dime defense, high leverage, get the opponent off the field on a 3rd down or on a passing down typically. So you might see it on 2nd and 10, but to see it on all 1st and 2nd downs, very unusual. all dictated in terms of usage by the Steelers. They figured out what they had to beat the Ravens with, and they honestly did a great job of adjusting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Certainly, the Steelers made that tactical adjustment in a very concerted effort to do that. And I'm curious, I guess they didn't, now that I think about it, they didn't face too many third and longs, and maybe that played into that as well.
Yeah, not too many. They had a few in the first half. They had 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10. A lot of those plays they were in that the package I named earlier because they had board on the field for the rush nickel. So they had a 3rd and 3, a 3rd and 10, a 3rd and 12, and another 3rd and 10 at the beginning of the second half where they had board on for all four of those, and they were able to get them off. But then the Steelers figured it out. They figured out the magic code.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Really frustrating. Obviously, we've been fans of outstanding dime defense here in Baltimore for the team's history. They used it all, basically the entire time, except for 5 years under Dean Pease, the first 5 of his 6-year tenure here. To not be able to field a good dime and to go into a game with the kind of the helplessness of knowing you're not going to be able to field a good dime because you're both a safety short and a corner short in terms of real quality. Very frustrating to me.
Yeah, I certainly can understand that, and just one of those things where you kind of expect that they have an answer when they didn't release Marcus Gilchrist, and you just kind of expect that they have an answer, they have an improvement there, and they didn't pretty clearly.
You didn't get anything more from the interviews or from question answered about the reason why the team would have released Gilchrist after he seemingly had played decently. He did seem to have a coverage breakdown on one of the longer plays, the 50-yarder to Hightower.
Yeah, Hightower in the Eagles game. Nothing specific. Partly because there's so much news to get to this week with Tez Bryant and Ngakoue, and just the rivalry that maybe a small storyline like that kind of slipped through the cracks when in other weeks it could have been explored a little bit more. Chris Hewitt, the past defense coordinator, defensive backs coach, essentially, he talked a couple weeks ago and really complimentary of Gilchrist. Basically said that he's a veteran who's played in similar defenses and really sees the defense the way we like it. So I was pretty stunned. And again, it's not just about Gilchrist. It's about the fact that there wasn't a corresponding move to find that number 6 defensive back in whatever form that would have been.
Hey, other guys sitting on the practice squad who's a veteran is Nate Hairston.
Yeah.
Any indications maybe of what might be done with him?
Yeah, he's a Maryland native, Frederick, I think. Temple, played at Temple, has some experience with the Colts.
Jets.
Jets, yeah. So, I'm not entirely sure what they think of him. He was only signed the week of the Eagles game, so right before. So he's had 2 weeks of practice now. I think he's not quite as experienced as Gilchrist. I think Hairston's played like 40 career games, whereas Gilchrist has been around forever. So he probably would be a guy who might need an extra week of practice before he's ready. To my knowledge, he's mostly been a pure corner, but maybe he's a guy they think can shift around the defense. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. I mean, the other moving part they have is Jimmy Smith, that they could move him to safety, and he's already done some of that this year. We talked enough about that. I meant to talk about Jimmy, but we could talk about him because he's terrific in the game. I want to talk about the pass rush a little bit before we do that. Now, I know everybody's interested in the first start from Yannick Ngakoue and what happened with him. The Ravens did I think, the best they could in terms of getting Ben to release the ball quickly. They kind of knew he would. They didn't take a lot of chances with numbers in this game. In fact, I have numbers for you here. They used 1 pass rush of 3, 21 with 4, where they averaged 6.2 yards per pass, 12 rushes of 5, where they averaged only 2.9 yards per pass. They had 1 sack and 1 turnover on those. They never in this game rushed 6+. First time this year that they had not rushed 6+ on a play. So I would call it a very conservative scheme by numbers.
Yeah, a conservative scheme, and I think maybe we thought going in, you get a guy like Yannick Ngakoue, and you think maybe you don't need to blitz as much. I think that those numbers are probably more about trying to defend Roethlisberger and the scheme there. And like we keep talking about it, for the most part, it worked pretty well. The defense did a great job for a good chunk of the game. And the issues, sure, you might have wanted to get to Roethlisberger, one or two more times, but I think if you have better coverage, I don't think the Steelers find that rhythm. So I don't think you fault. Yeah, they didn't blitz as much. I think you mentioned that Washington was the only game they blitzed less,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't necessarily think that those calls were a problem or anything like that.
No, I didn't think so either. And when you look at it, the 5.1 yards per pass, as much as we didn't like the fact that they exploited the dime when the time really came and they had 2 long drives against the Ravens defense, which isn't supposed to happen. But the fact that they only allowed 5.1 yards per pass, that's good enough to win. That should win you the game. It was really more a function of penalties and turnovers that really cost them the game otherwise than that.
Yeah, and if you want to focus on the defense, I guess not the gripe, but the counterpoint would be that they only forced the one turnover. You didn't intercept Roethlisberger and sack him enough, and that's all fair. But yeah, the defense certainly played well enough. Had Lamar Jackson not turned the ball over 4 times, you're talking about how the defense held up so well, and those 2 late touchdowns the Steelers scored when they spread out were just in garbage time.
Yes,
the Ravens had a dominant win. So yeah, I think overall, there's a lot to be pleased about.
Right. Roethlisberger had ample time and space, which is the metric I use for a 3-second pocket on just 5 of 34 dropbacks in this game. Now, there are 14 times where he had the ball out quickly of 34 dropbacks. First of all, that's remarkably high. But second of all, I have a bias towards not giving an ample time and space on that. If I think it might have occurred, if I think it would have occurred, I give it to him. But if I'm not sure if it would have occurred, I don't give it to him. So 5 out of 34 is only 15%. That's ridiculously low. It certainly is a amount. It's not an amount of pressure, but it's an amount of denied ample time in the pocket, which was the big problem early in Roethlisberger's career. That the Ravens should have generated some turnovers or some other high variance results, whether that's additional sacks or perhaps a holding call that they could have gotten. They should have had some more things good happen, given the paucity of ample time and space that Roethlisberger had.
Yeah, and I think if you're a Ravens fan, that's probably pretty encouraging that you put Roethlisberger, I don't know if under duress is the right word, but it's not like he was comfortable all game. The problem is when you have a veteran quarterback and the Steelers, like we said, like to mix the ball around, and they've got enough talent to do it. Roethlisberger's the kind of guy who even in tough, and he's been for his whole career, you put him in tough situations. That doesn't necessarily mean you get the results you want.
Yeah. All right, a few other things I talk about the deceptive elements. 5 blitzes from off the line of scrimmage. That was a low for the season. 2 each by Humphrey and Queen led the team. They used 10 individual stunts. Those were split over 8 pass plays. Now, those were very effective. They had 2 sacks, 2 quarterback hits, 2 pressures, and of 6 passes thrown among those 8 plays, they only had 18 net yards, so 2.3 yards per play. I look at that stunt success, particularly with the return of Judon in the next game, and the other elements they have put together on this team with great underneath stunt players, as being one of the big positive indicators for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's something that again, same deal, should be very encouraging.
One of the things I wanted to mention specifically on this is that they really went after the Steelers' right A gap, of course, between the center and the right guard. That's Marquise Pouncey, 8-time Pro Bowler, and David DeCastro, right? Yeah, 5-time Pro Bowler. And that's a good gap to be able to stunt through. And it's really a measure of the ability of Wolf in particular, but also of McPhee to draw double teams there that created those stunt opportunities there. One of them was on the play where Ngakoue stunted through, missed the sack of Roethlisberger, but he got the initial pressure, and then Elliott and Board were able to clean up.
Yeah, I think all that's a good point. And McPhee is just the guy you mentioned. I think we kind of expect that out of Wolf. McPhee's a guy who's been really, really solid. And
oh, yeah.
I think going into this offseason, I think there was some question as to whether or not he'd play again after the injury he suffered last year. So he's been an encouraging guy.
Now, he's again playing way more snaps than I think is probably a good idea. I think they really need to focus his snaps down. But it's so hard to get him off the field because he's great against the run and the pass. He's just been dominating. What do they do with a guy like that? And what do they do about signing him for next year?
Yeah, that's really interesting because next year he'll be going into what year 11,
Yeah.
and sure you thought after the triceps injury maybe his career was over. I think a lot of folks probably thought after his stint with Washington maybe he wouldn't find a roster. So he's a really interesting guy. He seems like he holds the edge really well, but he can also you move him inside to rush, kind of versatile player that they love. But you're right. I do think they are intending, and I think it might have started on Sunday had Judon not been ejected. I think they're probably intending to reel back his snaps a little bit at some point soon.
Well, it's interesting because they have some options to do so, but this is a point in the show where we usually just start picking individual players. So you pick one, and then I'll pick one. We'll talk about your guy, and then we'll talk about my guy, and each have a chance to respond. 4 or 5 exchanges is fine here.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start with Marcus Peters just because he's a guy we talked about before that kind of caught my eye. Forced a fumble right after he had committed a penalty, and he's just a guy who you just get a sense that this season he's going to make some play, good or bad, that's just gonna really turn the season. And I think his kind of explosive nature when we mentioned he ripped his helmet off and yelled at Patrick Queen, he's just a guy who so often catches my eye. I thought he played really well on Sunday, and when we talked about the Ravens defense didn't force any turnovers, he's a guy who did it. He's not always been a punch out kind of guy, but he did it on Sunday.
Wasn't as clear from the broadcast angle, but Peters had, I thought, a really good interception opportunity when he had step-by-step coverage down the right sideline, did not turn for the football the way he normally does, and I thought it was very close, but it wasn't as clear from the broadcast angle that should have been an interception.
Yeah, I do. I remember that play, and and with him, it's such a high bar because he's so good making plays on the ball generally. But still in position, and part of the reason that the Steelers need to spread out and pick on Terrell Bonds is because the Ravens have such good corners and Jimmy Smith, Marlon Humphrey, and Marcus Peters at those other spots.
Oh, how about Jimmy Smith in this game? Great game again, I thought, for him. I was not in favor of spending a lot of money to re-sign Jimmy Smith, and I was in favor of cutting him before the last year of his contract. But he's been a godsend to this defense. I mean, he provides all the flexibility in the defensive backfield to play safety or corner. He's been outstanding when he's played corner. This was another great game. He got thrown at a handful of times, maybe 6, maybe 7, with only a couple completions. Are very short. Had great coverage on the boundary and what I call the Ike Taylor treatment, where he kind of forces a receiver out of bounds. I'm forgetting who that was. Might have been Deontay Johnson early in the game. They kind of forced out of bounds. You might remember.
Yeah, I think I don't want to say for sure, but I do remember that play. And Jimmy seems to be great at that when he just kind of shields you. I thought Brendan Carr was pretty good too, but Jimmy with his kind of longer body is great at that. And he had an Achilles injury that just popped up on the injury report Thursday. That a guy like that, he's just always seems like he's on the injury report. And in previous years, he missed some games, but this year he's been able to play through everything. And it's really a credit to him. Not only he's been able to play through everything, but he's played so well.
Yeah, kind of a scary proposition with the Achilles. I mean, I think while he's played so well, I want him on the field more. But he's very much like Mike McPhee. I think we need to, if there's some physical limit to what he can do, and he would really benefit from a lower snap count, then I think you want him on the highest leverage snaps, which makes sense then for him to come in the dime defense, get the other team off the field, but not be in there down after down after down, playing outside corner. So a slot corner, acquiring one of those, allows Marlon Humphrey, when healthy, to move back to the outside along with Peters, and it gives you that flexibility for fewer snaps for Jimmy Smith.
Right, and slot corner would be great, but again, the problem is can you find the guy before 4 p.m. Tuesday? And Marlon Humphrey, he seems like he's definitely going to miss at least one game if the Colts Ravens game arrives on time, and who knows, possibly more. He's got to wait at least 3 days from his most recent symptoms to return to team activity. So if Marlon Humphrey misses 2 or 3 games, all of a sudden you might not have any choice but to play Jimmy Smith close to 100% of the defensive snaps the next couple of weeks in really important game.
Yeah, I don't think there really is an option, at least against the Colts. And it sounds like it might be 2 games that Humphrey misses with a 10-day window, even though it's technically 13 until they play that that game after the Colts. Is it Titans or the New England after the Colts?
That's the Patriots, I believe, and then
Okay.
then they play the Titans at home after that.
All right, very good. How about another player? I just picked Jimmy Smith.
Yeah. We mentioned him before, but Jalen Ferguson, I thought, had a pretty good game. I assume he played more than he would have otherwise with Judon being ejected, but he's a guy who I thought last year when he had to come in for McPhee, the Seahawks game is when McPhee got hurt last year, and the Seahawks started to run at Ferguson almost play after play because they just didn't think he could hold the edge. Now it seems like he's setting the edge all right. He got in on Roethlisberger that one time, and a little bit of it's encouraging because he was a guy who maybe you thought might have been inactive when they traded for Ngakoue.
Yeah, great point. I thought Ferguson really had the game that really brings back thoughts of what we hoped he was when he was drafted. Because, I mean, the thought was you have a really big guy here, tremendous college sack record, very much like Terrell Suggs. Now, nobody was really, I don't think, hoping that we'd get Terrell Suggs in the third round, I guess he was drafted in, whenever he was drafted.
Yeah, third round.
And so, that wouldn't have been realistic, but he's had never really put together any game where he flashed in all facets. So he had the cleanup sack you mentioned. He took care. If you look at Q3 705, take a look at this when you get a chance. Anyway, you may be able to pull it up now, but he shed a pulling left guard. I can't even tell you how rare that is for a defensive end outside linebacker to shed a pulling left guard to make a tackle on Connor. He did everything right on that play, kept his arm on the outside. Everything was right for him to take down Connor after he shed him. It's a Suggs-like play in terms of his ability to play the run. Suggs, of course, while a good pass rusher, was a generational run stopper on the outside. He's one of the big reasons the Ravens had that dominant nickel for all the years.
Yeah, and that's really important to the Ravens. That's why McPhee has been back and been valued and really important. And it makes you wonder, when a young player sees that a team is willing to trade to bring somebody else in, it doesn't motivate you a little bit. Maybe it lights a fire under you. Sometimes we maybe put too much weight to that sort of stuff, but it certainly seems like it's worth questioning whether Jalen Ferguson kind of woke up a little bit when Yannick Ngakoue arrived.
Yeah, well, I think it would have to have that impact on him. I mean, he certainly had a big game, and I think you're right that he's found a spot for himself now on first and second down, given the edge-setting game he had. And, McPhee might be the other guy who plays there, but they really need McPhee on passing downs. And it would be nice if they could find a way to use maybe a little bit of a rotation opposite Ferguson on first and second down and really make him their primary run stopper on those plays.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it kind of, it solves the problem of McPhee playing too many snaps. It gets a young player more experience, and they've got the space to keep him active. Why not give him that role?
Yeah, he's a rush linebacker because very infrequently does he ever get asked to drop the coverage, but he did once in this game, and I thought it was really impressive. It's at Q3 144, folks out there if you want to take a look at it. But he dropped to a short zone, and it appeared he was in the throwing lane, and Roethlisberger had to alter the pass to get it through to Smith-Schuster, which then made it be off target. So he didn't get it past the fence on the play, but I thought he did a really good job of kind of knowing what was going on behind him and perhaps reading Roethlisberger to do so, maybe understanding the route concept off the line of scrimmage. But I honestly think it's more likely he just read Roethlisberger in terms of where he was going with the ball.
Yeah, and Wink Martindale's talked about that a little bit, is sometimes that's really when you drop these guys back in coverage, it's not necessarily asking them to diagnose a route or anything like that. It's really just you drop them back and you got those big long arms and hopefully that they can see the quarterback and be athletic and make a play. And not something that Jalen Ferguson or Calais Campbell, whoever, is expected to do regularly, but it's something that these guys can do, and the Ravens are going to give them the chance to do it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a really fun scheme thing to do, I think, against short passing games, because anytime you get a outside linebacker or anybody dropping from the line of scrimmage and then moving laterally, you have a chance for a quick close of a window. The quarterback's very focused on the front side of that window and beating the trailing defender and making sure the ball's in the spot for the receiver. But it's the guy closing from the other side that's closing the window very rapidly in a relative sense, because both those players, of course, moving to each other in a relative sense. And he's the one who's usually got the chance for the good interception or the pass defense or whatever. And there's really good opportunity for that. And when the Ravens have weakness there, it could be these simulated pressure opportunities where they take a chance to drop guys from the line of scrimmage, move them laterally. That gives a lot of opportunity to create havoc in those short zones.
Yeah, and that's a way to address it if teams try and spread you out and whip these short passes. And we talk about turnovers. The Ravens know they need to create turnovers. That's been a big focus, big part of their success so far this season. And if that's a way to do it, I think so often we kind of assume that turnovers are just, ball hawking cornerbacks or ball hawking safety. There's scheme. There's these coordinators know how to generate opportunities for that, and that might be a way.
Yeah, it definitely is a scheme and then opportunity. The Ravens have done a great job with the opportunity on some of the second man of the ball, forced fumble stuff, and first man of the ball, by the way. I mean, their cornerbacks are looking to take that ball away.
Yeah, and they finish every practice with these drills where, a running back will hold the ball and coaches will try and punch it out. And then on defense, it's vice versa. Some cornerback will hold the ball and everyone else tries to punch it out. It's not just lip service when they say we work on it all the time. They end every practice with turnover drills.
Yeah, that is a lot of fun to watch during camp. That's for sure. The other one that I don't know if they used in this camp because, wasn't there, but the tennis ball gun, were they using that again to try and increase interception rates?
I don't remember seeing that this year, actually. We were able to watch most of every training camp practice. But obviously it was a shorter training camp, and then they cut it off for us a couple days earlier than they would have otherwise. So, but yeah, that's a fun one too.
Anyway, we wouldn't be doing justice to the show if we didn't talk about Yannick Ngakoue's first game as a Raven. Well played in some respects. Did not have a big impact on pressure. He did have 2 pressures as I scored it in 31 snaps. What I thought was really good, and I know the Ravens will be really happy if this maintains the way, is 27 pass snaps and 4 run snaps. And that is perfect. You want your situational pass rushers to actually be on the field for passes. Yeah,
that's interesting that it worked out so evenly like that. You wonder how much of that is that's kind of random chance and stuff like that. But yeah, I asked Calais Campbell actually after the game about Ngakoue just to get his perspective, and he said that it's just so hard for a pass rusher when Roethlisberger's getting the ball out like that to get into a rhythm, and maybe it was kind of a tough time to make his team debut because of how quick Roethlisberger was getting the ball out, but certainly getting his feet wet. You can't match Marcus Peters' mid-season team debut from last year. So hopefully Ngakoue makes a little bit more of an impact moving forward.
Yeah, I think he'll be there. I think I see so much positive coming out of the stunt game. I think he's more involved in that here in Baltimore than he was in Minnesota. They did not stunt as much there. He was much more in these wide 9 stance. I don't know how many of his snaps from there you watched, but I looked at all the pass snaps he was in. And he was, I thought there were other things he'd help the Ravens more, fanning out tackles, creating large open space to be used. That didn't really happen in this game. But again, Campbell made the point, and it's really accurate, that with the ball out so quickly, there isn't time for a lot of these scheme elements to develop in as quickly as you'd hope.
Yeah, certainly. And who knows, maybe if Judon's still in there, they use Ngakoue in some different way, but maybe this just wasn't quite the game for him to make the impact. But certainly I don't think he played poorly from the little bit I rewatched and watching live. He was around the ball a few times, never really seemed to get caught anywhere. It's just it didn't make the impact play you kind of hope when you trade for a Pro Bowl caliber guy and you trade 2 draft picks for him.
Yeah, he definitely. It looked like the whole team, and especially Campbell, really wanted him to get that first sack, or maybe it was McPhee who was talking to after the play, but that didn't work out. But he was couple impactful pressures he was part of, and so I'm okay with that. Is there another player, or do you want to maybe take some mailbag questions? You ready for that, or what was you?
Yeah, we can do some mailbag questions if there are some good ones.
Okay.
All right, the mailbag is your chance to steer the show using the hashtag FilmStudyMailbag over on Twitter. All right, we've got a few in here, and let's start. Let's start with how the Steelers' offense affected. Is the empty formation played in the second half kind of the blueprint to stop Wink's dynamic defense? This is from Shea.
Yeah, so we hit on this a little bit earlier, and I'm afraid that it might be right now, particularly with Humphrey out for a game. Seems like forcing the Ravens into a four-corner alignment, and now it looks like maybe both Dorsey and Bonds in at the slot on each side would be the result of that, is pretty freaking scary from the Ravens' perspective. So I think quite possibly.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical to say that there's a blueprint because as I mentioned before, to repeat myself, I do think there's some faith to be had in Wink Martindale, and not every team has the wide receiver talent and the quarterback talent as the Steelers do. So I don't know if blueprint I would go that far, but it is an issue, and it's something the Ravens are going to have to address during this really crucial stretch against some talented offenses and veteran quarterbacks.
Is Phillip Rivers the kind of quarterback you would think might be able to execute that kind of a plan, even if the Colts had to go to a lesser wide receiver as their fourth?
You would assume so, because again, he's a veteran guy. He's gotten the ball out pretty quick in the past in San Diego, and Frank Reich has coached in all different kinds of schemes, but little West Coast kind of seems to be his preference. So. And he's a good game planner who likes to take advantage of things. So it's something I imagine that the Colts will do a little bit of what the Steelers did in the second half, and that Phillip Rivers is capable of doing what Ben Roethlisberger did when he got into a groove.
All right.
From Daniel, what's a bigger need right now for the Ravens as they got to hurry up and try to make a trade if they can? Would you say cornerback, wide receiver, or offensive tackle?
I'm all in on slot corner. I don't think there's an offensive tackle out there they can get at any reasonable price. Not that's any good. Even the bad teams who have a decent tackle, maybe even at the end of this contract, they may be trying to protect a quarterback or protecting their other players and don't want to trade him. But tackle's been very dear in terms of price. I think it's slot corner and not wide receiver where they need to go.
I think I'd agree in terms of who's available. When you talk about bigger need in terms of what is the thing that could really derail, a really promising season, I think if DJ Fluker isn't quite capable of pass blocking, or if you get another injury there, because it looks like now Will Holden is most likely their backup swing tackle if he comes off the practice squad. I don't know. We'll see. So I agree that if we're talking trade, it's probably slot corner is more reasonable. But if you're talking what's the scariest thing, offensive tackle should be in that conversation for sure.
Okay, that's a fair point. I would agree with both comments.
All right. Darren has some positive thoughts on Chris Board. And meanwhile, Jason has some negative thoughts on Terrell Bonds. And they're both wondering why these guys are on the field, if they should be on more or less.
I think we talked a little bit about Chris Board earlier. I think he basically did the job, in particular, being on there for 4 third down stops. It was a little frustrating the 2 times he was on where he gave up consecutive pass plays, but basically no problem with Board's performance in the game. I thought he was fine. In terms of Bonds, he's a weakness the other team is going to exploit. He's a undersized guy, which seems to affect his ability to get rubbed off plays, and that would concern me about him.
Yeah, I mean, Terrell Bonds is what he is. To defend him a little bit, I mean, he's a guy who played in the AFL, Tennessee State guy, really competes hard. And when you spread out the Ravens and Jimmy Smith, Marcus Peters, and Marlon Humphrey are the other 3 cornerbacks, of course Ben Roethlisberger is going to attack Terrell Bonds. So, and it's the Ravens wouldn't be leaning on him, wouldn't be playing him as much as they did if they hadn't had injuries at that position. So. Do you want Terrell Bonds on the field often? Probably not. Sunday was the first time he's played any defensive snaps in his career in the NFL. Could he get better? Absolutely. And is he a guy that fans should rag on? You can, but he is who he is. It's not like this is a third round pick who is in year 4 and should be stepping up at this point. He's kind of the guy they turned to because they had nowhere else to go.
Yeah, first year player, obviously no choice. Does it bother you at all that Khalil Dorsey was the first guy they called up? And obviously this was his second week, even third week for Khalil Dorsey, because he's on the active roster now, right? And Bonds is a PS call up.
Correct. And Bonds has now been called up twice. So if they called him up again, he would be exposed to waivers. They will have 2 open roster spots with Humphrey on COVID-19 list and Stanley eventually going on IR. He hasn't been on injured reserve yet. So they could call somebody else up. Maybe they'll do that with Bonds. I don't necessarily think that frustrates me or concerns me. I think that's just about special teams and about Dorsey. They like Dorsey on punt coverage. I think with that calculation is probably who's more likely to entice another team, and maybe Dorsey being a year younger or coming to the NFL a year later, maybe that factored into that.
Okay, that's a possibility. All good thoughts there. You did mention a good point that the Ravens actually have 10 offensive linemen right now on the roster, which is unusual because of the Colon Castillo elevation to try and keep him away. So it would be natural for them to drop back to 9 and have a 9 to make 8 on game day set of offensive linemen.
Yeah, but they could. But if they really like Colon Castillo and don't want to give him up, he's got to stay on the roster. So you've got 9 once you leave Stanley. Do you bring Will Holden up to the roster full time? Is he a practice squad? Because right now, if you've got 9, take Stanley out of the picture because he'll be on injured reserve soon. You've got 9 guys, but really all 4 who would be coming off the bench. We'll assume Phillips is starting. The 4 who are coming off the bench are all interior guys.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick McCarry, maybe he played tackle a little bit in college, but him, Powers, Bredesen, Colon Castillo, those are all interior guys. You need to have a tackle at some point. Can you really rely on the practice squad elevations to fill that spot? So that'll be interesting to see.
So the point was made, and there's a period on Monday where the protected practice squad players are available to be taken by another team. So just the fact that they protect Will Holden is not going to do it for 2 practice squad elevations. Now he's been released 8 times, I think, in his career by 7 teams, or this is his 7th team, and he's also been released 7. I've lost track of the numbers, but I thought he would make the team at the beginning of the year because I didn't think there was another obvious tackle. I do think it probably makes sense now to activate him, as you mentioned, and then that really does raise the question of, is it time to send down another player, and maybe it's Colon Castillo, maybe it's somebody else, and there really isn't anybody else at this point. You could IR Tyree Phillips. That would be the other thing that could happen if his injury is expected to last longer than 2 weeks.
Yeah, with Phillips, it's a high ankle sprain, and that's, I think, usually right about 2, 3, 4 weeks. So maybe that'll factor in. That's an interesting thought, because you can bring the players off IR after 3 weeks now. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. But yeah, and maybe they can just activate Will Holden off the practice squad every week. But they've got some roster maneuvering to do here over the next couple of days and certainly the next couple of weeks.
All right, well, that does it for the mailbag. Aaron, people can go on over to PennLive.com and read your writings there on the Ravens. They can follow you on Twitter at Aaron Kaz Reports. What else can people do to support you and check you out?
Yeah, so PennLive.com/Baltimore-Ravens. You mentioned the Twitter account. We have a Facebook page, Ravens on PennLive, I believe is the Facebook page. And we're just churning out content every day. So feel free to give us a shout. We're always happy to chat and interact with readers as well.
All right, awesome. And Ken, over on BaltimoreFilmstudy.com, the Situation Room came out this morning, on Monday morning. Tonight and Tuesday morning, this podcast will be out, and then we've got a full week of shows.
Yep, full week of shows. So and articles as well. We've got the offensive review tomorrow night. That'll be a lot of fun. And we got the Know Your Foe with Zach Hicks of the Colts on Wednesday. We got By the Numbers coming out with Dan Reese on Thursday. and that should be the content for the week. It'll be offensive line scoring. They'll come out. Maureen and I just did it tonight to get through all of it. It's quite a lot to get through. I think there's some great run blocking moments, but there's also some other not so great stuff that we're going to have to talk about, and just an awful lot to go over with a rotating offensive line this last week. I want to make sure people understand that Aaron is a great follow on Twitter. Highly recommend him. And you heard a little snippets of the insider kind of information he brings to the table. Please give him a follow over there. Very highly worthwhile, and I don't think you'll regret it. Aaron, you're pretty good about answering questions pretty quickly online.
Yeah. Give me a shout. Certainly middle of press conferences, middle of games, it can be tough to get to everybody. But we love questions and love to give answers when we can.
Yeah. So one of the questions I always have for people is, you always get to 100% of your questions at some point, meaning you look at it and you may only, if it's not a question, I don't feel the need to respond, but I usually will like it anyway if they tagged me. But if it is a question, I always respond to it eventually.
I also respond to any questions that come my way, but the response once in a while might be just an eye roll and not actually typed into Twitter.
That's fair.
So, all right, guys. Well, a full week. Keep on subscribing, keep sharing the show, and use that code Ravens when you're checking out MyBookie. And we will talk tomorrow with the offense.